Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I have interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of songwriters about the writing process. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So I've always been interested in treating songwriters the same way that we treat poets and traditional prose writers, as writers, plain and simple. There is no talk of how bands get their name, favorite tour stories, favorite foods, band drama, or anything else. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers as we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process. That's it, nothing else. And with that, let's get into today's episode. And today on the podcast, Annie DiRusso. Her new album is called Super Pedestrian. It is out now. I always love answers that I've never heard before, and Annie gave me at least a couple. The first is that she does all of her writing in bed. And I'd love to see a picture of this, but she said her bed becomes a giant mess of guitars, notebooks, pens, laptops, her laptop, her mic, she said her bed sheets have ink stains on them. Some songwriters like to write in couches, chairs, outside, but she likes to write in bed. So her bed is just filled with all of these things. It's not that she writes at night, I don't think. It's just that she finds the bed to be the place where she's the most productive. So again, I'd love to see a picture of that thing, just with things spread out, guitars and all that stuff all over the place. The other thing is the actual process of writing. Some songwriters will, if they are writing things and they write something that they don't like, if they're using pencil, they erase it. If they're using pen, they'll either cross it out so they can come back to it if they need to, or they'll furiously scribble over it so they never have to look at it again. From what I understand, she does none of those things. DiRusso will just keep on writing, doesn't erase anything, doesn't cross anything out, just keeps on writing. And then the stuff that she likes, she circles. So those documents must be really long. And she did say she has thousands of notes on her voice app. And I think if you listen to the interview, I believe she said that each notes app will contain one idea. So often during the day, she might have 20 or 30 entries, 20 or 30 entries in her notes app. So I love that idea of never erasing, because you have the option of always going back to things. And hey, one of my favorite quotes, probably the favorite quote of the podcast. She said she's a much better songwriter when she's reading. And amen to that. That you've got to read if you want to become a good writer. But if you don't know that by now, with all the stuff we've talked about in this podcast, then you got to go back to some of those episodes. But we talked a lot about favorite writers and poetry too. I seem to be on a roll here with songwriters who like poetry. So we talked about that as well. And one more thing. This interview was just chock full of ideas. The importance of walking to her process as well. She said that she walks, and she'll walk and try to get lost. And in the process of getting lost, comes up with a lot of great ideas. So anyway, love this episode. Again, Annie DiRusso's new album is called Super Pedestrian. And here is the episode with Annie DiRusso. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Sure.
And I always start with a very basic question. That is that is it important to create in some fashion every day, no matter how bad it is, or do you feel like it's more important just to wait until the mood strikes?
So I go back and forth on this all the time, actually. When I was in the 6 months where I was writing my record, I was absolutely creating every day and every hour. In the times in between, I guess, that cycle, I don't necessarily try to write every day. I do think that for me, it's having my brain open in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Ready to receive and observe and kind of critically think about things and relate them to other things, which I think comes in phases for me for sure. So I will say I'm more of a when the inspiration strikes type writer, but I do think there's definitely been merit in still pushing through that and writing every day in different phases of my life.
So when you were writing every day for the album, is it because you just had so much to say, or is it because I'm writing an album and I have to create? I kind of have no other option, if that makes sense.
Um, I was scared it was gonna be the latter, but it was the former. I had a lot to say. I was home from touring for the first time. I was kinda touring heavily for about 2 years, and I was home in Nashville for the first time, just living a normal 23-year-old day and kind of figuring out what that was, and, hanging out with people again and getting back into the social community in Nashville and reflecting on the 2 years of my life prior that I was on the road a lot. And I think I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself to write for the first time. I knew I had to write my record. It was time, like, I had 6 months off the road, basically off the road to do so. And when I was knew that was happening, like, at the end of the last tour, I was pretty scared because that is crazy. So 6 months, write a whole record. And writing doesn't come very easy to me. I think it's quite elusive. Um, and so when I got off the tour, I just decided to not put a lot of pressure on it and put some more emphasis on just living my life, and I engaged in what I call Party July, where I just partied because the tour ended at the end of June. So I just partied in July, and then I wrote 3 of the songs from the album in the most natural way that has ever happened to me, basically, just hanging out with friends and writing about what I was up to, and that taught me just a huge lesson right there. The writing of this record was a huge learning experience in just how to kind of prioritize my whole life. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess I knew I had to write the record, but I wasn't like, "Fuck, I need to write every single day." So and just feeling that, like, weight on me, it was more like, "Okay, I also need to be engaging with life and such to write." So I do feel like it ended up being more like I just had a lot to say, which was nice.
Okay, so two follow-ups. One is when you're not writing, are you deliberately not writing? I mean, a lot of songwriters tell me they say they're filling the well. Like I've had some that tell me they actually resist the urge to write because they just need that space when they're not doing it. So when you're not writing, is it a deliberate kind of like I've got things to say, but I don't want to write now?
I mean, yeah, I guess right now, specifically when or the last few months where I was just promoting this record, I wasn't often sitting down with my guitar to write anything, but I was still writing things down in my notes and stuff, which is how I usually will go about starting a song is just writing ideas and lyrics down. But yeah, I wasn't really sitting down to put it all together. And I don't know if it was a super conscious decision, but it never was like this really feels like the right time. But again, if I did feel like I was overcome with some kind of emotion I really wanted to write about it, I would not stop myself at all because I think that that's a very fleeting thing. Um, and if you were to stop yourself, I to me, writing's so elusive, I would really never stop the process in its tracks, but maybe I wouldn't go out of my way to make it happen in this time.
Do you do other types of writing? Do you journal at all?
I do journal. A huge thing for me when I was writing the record was very, very detailed journals of my day or my night or my interactions, um, that I would return to, like, a week or so later, kind of with some space, go back in and underline things, that stuck out to me, and that was really, really helpful. And it's kind of crazy now because I have very detailed accounts of that year of my life, which is kinda nice.
So though, do those serve as sources for inspiration for songs?
Oh, for sure, yeah,
They did.
sure. There's always phrases I'll say that'll be like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," and stuff like that, but in the moment, I'm just, like, typing away.
So how did you learn to use that distance? I love that idea. Where did that come about? You said I think like a week or so, but why? How did that help you rather than like the immediacy of going back when the emotions are still there?
Well, I think I always try to write something while the emotions are there, and sometimes that does hit, and sometimes it doesn't, but I do think having some space gives a different perspective on the situation, and I think I stumbled upon that, honestly. I just happened to be looking through my notes, like, if I just had a day and I sat down with my guitar to write a song, I'll always just look through my recent notes of what I've put, in there, and just happened to see, like, a journal entry from a while ago and underline it, and then it did become a little bit of a practice for me to give something some space before returning to it.
So you're underlining, that's interesting. So you're underlining actual words and phrases, and you're thinking, oh, that could be a line in the song.
Yeah, exactly, or that could be, like, an idea in a song, but yeah, a lot of times it'll be like, that could be a line. My music's pretty conversational, my lyrics are, so I do feel like that does tend to work for me where I can just go and underline something and, you know, it's always funny reading back journals because even a week later, they feel incredibly dramatic. Like, but I'm so happy I was doing that in order to, capture those feelings and then return to them with more context.
So I have a question about the notes because most songwriters tell me they have thousands of voice notes, voice memos, whether they're
Uh-huh.
voice memos or ideas. And my first thought is there any organization to those whatsoever? Or do you just, I can tell probably not the way you're responding.
No, there's no organization whatsoever. I mean, I guess the way I organize, so my iPhone notes, like, just lyrics. This is probably a nightmare to a lot of people, but every time I have a new idea, I start a new note. So I don't ever compile in one note because I don't want to get things to get lost or to, conflate two ideas. So I basically start a new note every single time. So in a day, that could be 20, you know? So I have thousands and thousands of notes to scroll through, but it makes it easy for me when I go to look at the notes. And then if I have an idea that connects to it, an idea, I'll put it under that note, but each idea is a different note. And then on my voice memos, I just I record like in a version of the same idea 50 times in one sitting. I don't label any of it and I keep it all.
I love that you say that with such pride. That's the amazing thing is what I love about your response is that because that's pretty common. Honestly, most songwriters don't organize them at all. But when they say that, it's always the wistful kind of, oh, I got to get better at this. I know I won't. But I love that you said that with such conviction. Like, fuck it. I mean, this is the way. So do you wish it were different or do you like that? Because all I think about is, gosh, if you're looking for that idea, you can be frantically searching a long time for that thing that you did a week ago. That's 150 notes, in the past, right?
If it's something like, say I'm working on, this is how I would work through it. If it's something that I've recorded 50 times, usually the last one is where I get to a more uh like a further along place with it. So I'll usually start by listening to the last one I recorded and then go back in. But yeah, it takes a lot of work, I guess, to go through because sometimes there's a slightly different melody, especially when you first start playing with melodies. They change in such a small way that can make a huge impact. So that is always my fear. Like sometimes I'll get anxiety that, especially if I'm not recording something while I'm working on it, I'll get this anxiety that the melody was slightly better before and I completely lost it and I can't figure out what it is. So I do try and record. This past like cycle of writing the record, I was actually like filming myself writing the whole time. So I was just on like a photo booth on my laptop and that was kind of cool to be able to watch myself write, like go back and watch it, but it is pretty tough in terms of the organization.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, the flip side to that is when you have to go through everything all over again, there may be a nugget in there that you would have missed otherwise if it were flawlessly organized.
Totally, totally. Going through everything is kinda helpful. Um, and also, then I do have to just go through and I find a lot of ideas that I completely forget about or I'd pass to the side, and coming back to those even, like, a year later is awesome.
So those ideas that come to you quickly, are you, those songs that come to you, the lightning in the bottle songs, are you less likely to revise those? Because again, I hear, and I'm a prose writer, not a songwriter, but songwriters, some tell me that those songs that come too quickly, they're almost distrustful of. Like, why did it happen so quickly? And there are others that say, if it happens that quickly, I'm not going to touch it because there's a reason why that happened. So where do you fall in that?
Um, First thing I'll say is that rarely happens to me. Um, I take a really long time to write songs and I love revising, but when that does happen, I am instinctually a little distrustful, but really I'll just play it if the way I know that a song is good is if I'm, like, addicted to playing it live, basically. If I just wanna keep playing it in my room on my guitar. Um, and so if I get to that point with it and I'm not making that many tweaks, it's fine. The biggest thing for me is that I want every single word of a song to be exactly what I want to say. So that's where I get a little crazy. So I could end up just tweaking like 1 to 2 words in the studio. But there are a few songs on this record that ended up being almost exactly the same as the day I wrote them, which is pretty cool.
Let's talk about revision because you said you love to revise. I
Yeah.
had Christian Lee Hudson on the song about a month ago, and
Cool.
I've got a quote that he actually said to me, and I love this quote. He said, "My biggest hurdle as a writer is trying to hack my brain to become less critical." So I had Matt Nathanson on a few years ago, and he actually calls that voice the assassin. He says the assassin. He's always battling the assassin because the assassin is that voice inside his head telling him, "Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that." And both of them talk about how getting that voice becoming less critical. So, and I think that that is more of like as they're writing, kind of deciding whether they should include something. So I guess I'd love your take on that. Are you critical as you write? It's kind of a two-part question. Are you critical as you write like that? And also when you revise, are there certain things you're looking for? Like, I know as a writer, there are certain things I do in my writing that I have to go back. I don't care that I do it as I write, but I know that I do it and I go back and I look for those things. So anyway, thoughts on that?
I love that quote. I try not to be critical while I'm writing because I think that stops the process in its tracks. Um, Especially if I start to think about, how will an audience react to this? Or sometimes I'll do this thing which I think is, like, really bad, where I'll show someone the song too early, and that will immediately stop me in my tracks. Because as soon as I play it for someone else, in my head, I'm like, "That's stupid, that's stupid, that's stupid," you know, and I'm kinda like and then I it oftentimes will, like, stop me on that whole idea. Um, so I try really hard not to be critical while I'm writing in the initial first sit down and see how much I can get out, which is, like, such a crazy feeling to sit there and try to create something that doesn't exist for so long. Um, but I think it's the most rewarding feeling ever, but I try to do as much as I can before letting anything touch it in terms of anything or anyone else touch it. And then kind of like the journal thing, I'll go back to it a few days later or the next day with a fresh perspective, and that's when I'll start to get critical. And there are specific things I look for in my writing. Like I don't wanna be super repetitive. Like I don't want multiple songs to say the exact same thing or in the same way. Um, and I really want everything to reflect my true feelings about things, which is impossible because it's changing all the time. Um, and a lot of times I really love trying to make things as concise as possible. So That's another thing I do, like, where I'll cut a bunch of kind of parts of songs if I'm being too repetitive, but I try in the initial sit down not to let the criticism in yet, and then I go on a long road of revision.
Yeah, I there's certain things I do. Like in my prose writing, I tend to write repetitive sentence structures. Like I'll have 5 sentences in a row that all are structured like clause and clause, clause but clause, like something like that.
Yeah,
It drives me crazy that I do that, but my worst fear is that if I think about that as I write, it'll stop me cold.
and it would, it literally would. That's what happens to me, like, if I tried it even if there's a theme that I feel like I've written about too much, or if I think a song is mean or something, a friend an artist friend of mine or songwriter friend of mine who's friends with this other songwriter I admire told me once, like, "You just have to, like, write the song, and then if it's good enough, you can figure it out later." You know? If it's, like, a subject matter you weren't ready to explore or, um, a different style, it's always something that you should just write and then come back to it. Because if you're feeling like writing something, you really shouldn't stop yourself because it's not like you're live writing, on a live stream. Like, you can always come back to it. Like, that would be my nightmare. My nightmare would be writing something on a live stream.
Right, and I feel like you're absolutely right. My problem is when I look at something that I've written, I'm typically mortified. It's rarely, oh, that's even better than I thought. It's always, oh my god, I really wrote that. You know,
Yeah,
um, So, okay, so back to the specifics of the writing process. Are you a phone person, computer person, or pen and paper person when it comes to lyrics?
I'm historically I've been a pen and paper person when it comes to lyrics. If I'm gonna sit down and write. I think throughout the day, though, I'll type things into my phone. Um, just because it's just right there, all the time. But I will write things in my journal too. That's another organizational thing that gets a little tough. 'Cause, in my notes in my phone, I can type in keywords, but if I wanna go through my journal, I do have to, like, go through it, which I think ultimately is helpful, though. Even though it's a chore, if I'm looking for one thing in my journal, it makes me have to revisit a lot of things and kinda be like, "Oh, that's actually kinda interesting," on the hunt for something else. But I typically am pen and paper. I really don't like songwriting on my laptop very much, like typing notes on my laptop. I think when I was filming some of it on my laptop, it was helpful to just have my notes up. But I'm not really there's something that feels like a little sterile to me about like typing things out on my laptop while I'm also not that good of a typer. I'm a much better my handwriting's terrible, but it's just a lot easier for me to just like scrawl something out, you know?
All right, so a couple follow-ups, and I'm going to get very specific here. So, because I find that songwriters are incredibly particular about the color of ink, brand of pen, and even type of paper. So, are you loyal to any of those things?
So it has to be my journal. Like I don't just want to write a song on a random thing. Um, Rarely if I'm reading something, I'll write stuff in the book that I'm reading, but I really want just to write a song on a random piece of paper. Um, and then I like prefer black ink. Like I wouldn't want and a smooth roll. I don't want it to be or like a Muji type pen. But writing in pencil, I just got kind of shivers talking about that. Like I've done it before, but it's not my preferred. I just want it to be so like easy right when I'm doing it, and then something I can close.
So, why black? Why not blue or does the color it sounds like the color matters.
Yeah, it does. I guess I didn't really ever think about that. The color totally matters. I don't want it to be a blue pen at all. Um, I feel like it would be on the wrong level. I don't know how to describe. Like blue is here and black is down here, and it needs to like hit the page on a depth that black would hit it.
I love it. See, those are the answers that I love. And I love the fact that you never thought about that before, but I love that the depth answer. Okay, now I'm going to get even more specific. When you see something that you don't like, do you cross it out like crazy so you can't see it, or is it a single line so that you can come back to it?
If it's something I really don't like, I guess I'll cross it really out, but really don't cross stuff out that often. Like, I'll just keep writing and then I'll circle the thing I like rather than
Wow.
the stuff I don't like.
So you don't that's I've never heard that before. So you don't cross out, you just keep on writing. So it's not like, "Oh, I don't like that. I'm gonna cross that out." I That takes enormous discipline because I would feel like for me, I've just gotta if I cross it out, I don't have to actually look at it, and it makes me it then that then it's not a part of my it's like they tell you when you take the standardized tests, like the answer that doesn't is wrong, cross it out so you're not looking at it anymore. But
Oh,
you don't
yeah, I don't do that. I kinda think it's funny a lot of times to go back and read what I wrote. Like, some of the shit that I have in my journal, like, I will just like there's this one specific journal entry that I wrote last year that I think is just the funniest thing ever, and it's, like, so embarrassing, but it's like, I would, like, hate for anyone to ever see it, but I'm like, that's it important for me to know that I had that within me, even though it's, like, terrible. Like, like, I like to see the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so even when you're revising lyrics, you're not necessarily crossing stuff out, you're just kinda circling it.
Yeah, I just keep rewriting things.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. Um, so the ritual of the process, I mean, I have certain times of day I'm more effective, certain chairs I like to sit in, rooms, things like that. When you're writing, how important is that to you?
Um, I love to be writing in bed is, like, a huge thing
Hmm.
for me. I will sit where I would lay, like, on the side of the bed I would lay, I'll just sit up. I'll have this is if I'm sitting down to write a song, like, with my guitar. I'll have a bunch of my guitars surrounding me, either my acoustic or a lot of times I, like, plug in multiple guitars just so I can, like, grab whatever. Um And my bed is then just covered in, like, guitars and notebooks. I have a stack of all of my journals I've ever written right next to my bed. So if I needed to reference something my bed becomes just a giant mess of guitars and notebooks and pens. There's, like, pen stands on all my sheets and stuff. And my laptop is always there too. And then sometimes if I'm, like, really getting into it, like, my microphone will be on the bed too, and, like, it's becomes this kind of studio of sorts. But that's kind of my preferred in terms of writing just in my notes, I think sometimes it's nice to have a concentrated, like, sit down with my journal or my phone or my laptop. Um, Not really with my phone, I wouldn't just sit with my phone and write unless I was in a pinch, but at a coffee shop or something like that, or just outside in a park is kind of nice to be out of my space and writing a little bit. But once it comes to, like, "Okay, I'm gonna sit down and write a song," it's usually in my bed.
Time of day matter or no?
No, it doesn't, but I'm kind of a night owl, so I would say, like, it would be rare for me to wake up and hit the ground running on a song.
I think that's I love that idea though. That I mean, I've I had one. Gosh, I had John Darnielle, the Mountain Goats, on, and he said he wrote an entire album at the dining room table because he said that's where the mojo was. Like, I love that idea that it's not like it was the table; it was like I'm feeling it here, And
Yeah.
I love that idea of the bed as being that place where who knows if it's superstition doesn't really matter. It's like, yeah, this is where I'm at my most productive in that space. But I'd
Yeah,
love that
that's where I just
awareness.
always went. It was kind of like since I filmed the whole thing, it's just always me in the same exact spot sitting writing the record.
So do you then my fear about that, and I'm the same way. So this is my fear too, is that by restricting myself to a place, then that makes it less likely for me to write, or it's an excuse for me, like, oh, I'm not at that chair, I'm not in my
Mm,
bed, so I can't write now. And that's always my fear is that I limit myself by having a favorite place, if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess the thing for me with it is that just the nature of the way I write songs, unless I'm intentionally co-writing, I would need to be alone to the point that if someone is in a house next to me I'm like, I am uncomfortable with it. I don't want anyone to be in earshot in any way to hear the process of what I'm doing because that's when the criticism kind of gets let in because I'm like thinking about other perceptions. And so oftentimes for me, that ends up being in my room at night, when people are doing their own thing. Um, so I feel like that's how I end up always just like in my bed with the guitar. Um, but yeah, I think at least I know that at the end of every night I'll end up in a bed with a guitar. So it wouldn't be the worst thing if I got stuck that being my place because I'll hit that mark hopefully every night. I'll make it to a bed and I usually have a guitar around. Um, but I think for like just writing stuff down, yeah, it would be probably cool to do it in all different places. Like I have friends I know because a bunch of my friends are songwriters and they'll like get on a plane and they'll be like immediately, and I'm not necessarily doing that. I really have to be thinking about it to do it.
The question I was going to ask you, which I don't think applies, is songwriters also tell me that if they write with a guitar, some of them prefer to be sitting, others prefer to be standing, others prefer to be walking around like in their house.
Well,
There's all different levels of like when I have that guitar, but I'm guessing that obviously doesn't apply to you because you're always in your bed,
I'm
so you're never.
sitting.
Yeah,
If I start to feel something, one thing is sometimes when I am writing songs, I will picture what it would feel like to play live because a lot of my songs have these full band moments, and I love like the hits and stuff like that, like having different and interesting guitar parts. So if I'm thinking about and picturing it live with the band, sometimes it is productive for me to stand and look in a mirror, actually, which I'll do
I love it.
right
All
at
right,
the edge of my bed. So it's like just a step away.
so like some of them will say they have to clean beforehand. Like I don't know why that is, but they have to make sure the room that there is clean.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I have had that thought before. I think it's easier to write in a clean room for sure, but to me, it almost becomes a procrastination method because my room is almost never very clean. So it's like, "Oh, I have to clean my room to write, so I guess I can't write." And then it's like, "Okay, now I'm just not writing." Like, and my room's dirty. So it's like nothing's happening at all. So I try to break that, but I do completely agree with the sentiment that it's much nicer to write in a clean room than it is when, like, the bed's not made or whatever.
by the way, you're totally right. I mean, people say the room has to be clean. What they're really saying is they're just procrastinating, but they don't see it that way. So I'm
Yeah,
the same way. I mean, we're all that way. It's
exactly, yeah.
yeah. I don't think I need a clean room to create,
Yeah.
but it's I've tricked my brain into thinking that.
Thinking that, yeah, that's so true.
Okay, two more questions. One, the role of movement. I find a lot of songwriters get ideas when their brains are engaged in unconscious activities. So, um, I've heard things like gardening, vacuuming, chopping vegetables, cleaning, driving, that and there's talk like that's the idea of why we get our best ideas in the shower. So when our brains are engaged in activities that require no conscious thought, that's when the thoughts come up. But there's something about repetitive motions. I mean, I mentioned Liz Fair earlier, and she told me that she gets a lot of ideas when she's swimming.
Cool.
The repetition of the just the strokes and that monotony. So I'd love to hear your take on that if that happens to you, if you get ideas in those moments.
Yeah, for sure, a huge, huge, huge part of writing this record for me was just taking really long walks, like, every single day. I was living in a new neighborhood in Nashville, and I would basically just walk trying to get lost, like, just which I never could because Nashville's so small, so I was, like, always trying to, and I would just walk for miles, either, like, listening to instrumental music or listening to other music, but that was where a lot of my ideas struck, was just walking, and writing stuff down was kind of, like, huge. So I would just my whole day was waking up, having, like, a matcha or tea, and then I'd go on a walk, come back, try to tinker around. I'd go on another walk, tinker around, see some people hopefully, and that would be helpful. But yeah, walking was, like, a huge, huge part of this.
So when you're walking then, are you and you're trying to get lost, are you noticing things deliberately? Or is it, I'm not going to notice these things. I'm going to be in my brain, in my head. Because I think there's a difference, right? Like if you're consciously noticing the neighborhoods and the houses, or if you're saying like, I'm just going to use this time to be in my own head.
I think it was a mix of both because I very easily go into my own head. So as soon as I start walking, I probably was right in there. But it was nice for me to try to push out and see what I was looking at. I'd lived in Nashville for 6 years at that point, and such a formative place for me. And I'm from New York, so it's pretty different. And just feeling the scenes and like being in Tennessee in the South and like seeing people on their porches and everything like that, and feeling the air, the heaviness. It's so humid in Nashville, like feeling the humidity and the heaviness of the air in Nashville, and smelling the trees and seeing all the different wildlife and plants was really cool for me. I was taking a lot of pictures of different plants or how the sky was looking and stuff like that. Um, but I was mostly that was when I was kind of trying to push myself to look outward.
I can't imagine that wouldn't have an impact. I've never heard anyone actually mention the humidity in the air, like actually noticing it. I mean, we all say that it's humid, but you said the heaviness of it. Um, I can't imagine that wouldn't affect the songwriting at some point.
I think it totally did. It felt like the environment of walking, like, and also it's through all different seasons. But when I think about the record to me, it feels like I can just picture it. Like I'm wearing this t-shirt, I'm on a walk. It's 7 p.m. or 7:38 in the summer. It's starting to get dark. Um, and it's so humid and I'm sweating. Um, and I'm just like slowly moseying and walking. And that's like that's what the record feels like to me. And it's because that's what I was doing like the whole time I was writing the record, I think.
I love that. I wish I could. I've had some songwriters tell me that they've written songs that have actually, when they've been on walks, that have actually ended up matching the cadence of the walk they were on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a song on the record called Hungry,
Yeah.
and I talked about Party July, but I also had Angry October. I was like really angry in the month of October when I wrote Hungry. And I was walking way faster, and I was walking with my fists clenched. Like, it was, like for, like, this 1 week, I was really mad, and then I wrote that song, it really helped things, but it was, like, definitely, like and I kept w the song was so about walking to me, like, I kept referencing I think I ended up cutting the lyrics, but I was referencing the street I was walking on, because I was just, like, walking down the street near my house, just kind of, like, storming down the street. Like my teeth clenched, my fist clenched, just angry. And that song ended up being pretty fast, and it is definitely was impacted by those walks.
And the good thing is, if you're looking like that when you're walking, no one's going to bother you, right?
No, and that's the hope. Exactly. Exactly. I was probably like really looked like not a person to go up to.
All right, last question. You mentioned reading. I do find that songwriters are voracious readers. I mean, the people I've interviewed who've been around for 40 plus years, none of them have ever said, "Oh, I don't read, it's a waste of my time." I mean, there's a reason. I think there's a very strong through line, clear through line between reading and writing. So I'd love to get your take on who do you read? Who are your favorite authors?
Um, it kind of changes all the time, but I completely agree. I think that I'm a much better songwriter when I'm reading. Like, and every time that I've taken a pause from reading or fallen out of it, then I start reading it. I'm like, oh, and that's why I'm such a better writer because I'm reading the way other people employ words is so inspirational. Um, I, for a few years before writing the record, was mostly reading memoirs. I loved like fiction and stuff when I was younger, and I just fell into memoirs really heavily in college, like musicians and comedians. And then when we were on tour right before Party July, we were at stopped by Powell's in Portland, and I got a few things. I got, some of the first, like, poetry I've ever, like, purchased and kind of read. I got the book Crush by Richard Siken. Um, and then I got the book Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, I think. Um, and that was a fiction book. So that was my first step back into fiction. And I just like tore through it. It's this amazing book about these two video game creators, and I don't play video games. I never really have been that into video games. But the creative collaboration between them in the process of making the video games is so similar to music that it was such an interesting read to me. And it talked about it spanned their whole lives together, basically meeting in college, creating the game, and the fallout that they experienced. And it just really was so, so, so good and really cool and creative. And then I got into poetry. And when I was reading Crush by Richard Seiken, which I thought was really compelling, my favorite part was the foreword, actually, written by Louise Gluck. Um, and so then I got a book of her life's work, basically. And it's like this big orange book with like a planet on the front. And that book was incredibly instrumental to me in writing.
Yeah.
I just love her writing so much. And then I read some of her like quotes on writing and stuff like that. And that was really, really helpful to me and interesting. Um, and then throughout the process of writing the record, I read like some Eve Babbitt's, which was cool. I like her short stories. I read some Murakami, which I was like, okay. It was
I think I saw that on a book review, actually. Okay.
yeah, I was like, okay. Like I did like it, but it was like, okay, this is okay. But it was still interesting to read nonetheless. And I was just reading a lot of things different people recommended, but it was like my first time really tapping into poetry. And I think that was huge for me for writing the record.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, you don't have to convince me, but I've interviewed whatever 400 songwriters, and probably 3% have ever read poetry. So
So
I
far.
know the value of it, but very few songwriters do, which I don't understand. But I'd love, I mean, first of all, why did you decide to get into it, and how do you think uh, how has it influenced you as a songwriter?
So I always felt kind of weird that I didn't read poetry as a songwriter because I do kind of write poetry sometimes and then sometimes I'll turn it into a song and sometimes I won't. But there have been a few times where I've written a poem and it felt kind of funny to me that I wasn't reading. It's a kind of there's something about it to be outputting something you're not willing to input. I don't know why that was a little I always felt this weird guilt about it. Um And I think it was kind of a fear of not being able to understand it or it not being something I could, like, voraciously consume, you know? And then as soon as I started reading poetry, I was like, I'm getting chills thinking about it. Like, it's just I love how concise, uh, like, Louise Gluck and Richard Steichen, both of them actually are able to be and to express such emotion. It was, like, shocking to me, and that is all I ever hope to do with songwriting. Like, that's the thing I love about songwriting. When something clicks for me like that, where I've been able to create, like, a concise sentence that really isn't descriptive of the feeling I'm trying to convey, but somehow conveys the feeling, you know? And to me, speaks to the universality of the human experience, the way that poetry can connect like that, and that really, really took me. Like, as soon as I got into it, I was like, "Yeah, I should have been doing this for a long time." It's so impressive the way that a lot of poets string sentences together and create this flow and this feeling, and it's really similar to songwriting, but it's even more impressive because they don't have the, um, luxury of having music and melody to convey the emotion that you're trying to convey. Like, it really only exists in the words and the space between them, and that was really, really, uh, impactful for me.
So it sounds like I'm not a genre person. I literally, my reading, I'm deliberately, if I finish a book by someone, my first thought is, what else can I read from someone else. Like, I don't want to read the same thing over and over by the same
Yeah.
writer. I want to get different voices in my head. So I will finish a book and then go to like the New York Times book review and be like, okay, that book's got good reviews. It sounds like a plot I like. I don't know this person, but I'll read it. So that's what I do. So how do you decide what you're going to read next?
I always have like a running list of things that I want to read, whether it's recommendations for friends or something that I like come across on the internet. Um, and then it's kind of just a right time, right place. Like whenever I finish the book, if there's something that specifically called me in that moment, then I'll go read that. Um, but I always have a running list, and there's a bunch of them have been on the running list for years. But it really is like when I finish that book, what I feel like I want, whether it's and I'm usually similar. I don't usually want something the exact same. So it kind of is just luck of the draw with when I'm done with a book where my head is at.
My last question is, for years, I was the kind of person that would say, I don't care how bad, it doesn't matter how bad this book is or how much I hate it. I'm going to finish this damn thing because damn it, I bought it. And then I have to say, once I decided to say, fuck it, I'm not going to finish this. It was so liberating, the freedom to be like, I don't like this. I'm not into it. I'm going to stop reading it. So do you insist on finishing something even though you don't like it? You do.
No, no, no. I'm in a
Oh,
process of stopping doing that right now because I've been the same where I'm like, I started this book, I need to finish it. And then it will ruin months of reading for me, right? Because I'm like, okay, I'm only like able to get through 5 pages of this right now. I don't want to read it. I feel like it's a chore to read. My rule is I try to get through, I used to say like the first 50 pages, but I do think getting through at least 75 pages of something is important to decide if it's worth continuing.
yeah, I need to get better at that because but giving myself a page limit, I'd like that. I don't have a page limit, so I probably go further than I should because I'm still okay. Maybe it'll get better. Next chapter, next chapter.
No, I say page limit because then it's just like I love like a little rule like that actually. It's just like, okay, I tried 50 pages, I tried 70 pages because a lot of people be like the first 50 pages are when you're going to know if you like it. I do feel like it takes more time with some books. So between 50 and 100 I think is the page limit. And just be like if it's not grabbing me yet, it's not going to. Because to me, even if it grabbed me at the very end, it's not worth it. Like, unless it was the craziest possible, most amazing thing that's ever happened, it's not worth it to me that I just read 300 pages I didn't like, you know?
And like I said, it's so liberating. Once I finally told myself I'm not going to finish this, it just opened up a whole other world of reading that I could do when instead of spending 2 weeks to read something. But it became this thing where it was like, I've got to finish it, damn it. Like,
Yeah.
I have to say that I read this book. I don't want to tell people I started, but I didn't finish.
And do you read multiple books at once or you always just do one at a time?
Okay, that's a great question. And I forgot a songwriter I interviewed years ago told me that she reads 5 books at a time. And
Mm.
I could never do that. But I do read too. I love that you asked that question. So they have to be a different genre. So it's got to be fiction, nonfiction, fiction, poetry,
Yep.
or if nonfiction, like something like that. It just can't be. And that songwriter told me that the reason why it's got to be different is because even if I'm not on the day I'm not reading that novel, it's still stewing around in there somewhere, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So do you
I
read
think
more than one at a time?
yeah, I do. I will usually have, like, one I'm more focused on, but I'm the same way, it can't be the same genre, though. So, right now I'm reading, like, another Eve Babbitt's book, which is kinda like short stories, and then I'm reading I forget the author's name, he's, like, a music critic writer, but it's all about, like, music history and stuff like that, which I don't read about that often, but it's really interesting, and then I'll read poetry. So, I can have, like, those 3 things stewing at once, um, but I can't really it couldn't be multiple things of the same.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget you can find all the episodes on all major streaming platforms and also at the Songwriters on Process website. That is at songwritersonpodcast.com. Pre-2020, this was not a pod. I was transcribing all of the interviews. So you can find all of them, hundreds of them, many hundreds of them on the Songwriters on Process website. You'll find both the transcribed interviews and the pod there. Take a deep dive, spend a day. These are great conversations with songwriters just about the writing process. Also, my book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, is out now worldwide on Hachette Books. You can find it online in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God, and it's his memoir. Again, that is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari. I am biased, but that's a damn good book. My email, ben@songwritersonprocess.com. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I love suggestions, questions, comments. People always email me and tell me who they want to see on the pod next. You never know. Send me an email, ben@songwritersonprocess.com. That's it for me, everyone. Have a great day.